Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, let's do it. Night guards. What's the scariest situation you've ever been in? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I used to work security for a ski resort. I was on the swing shift, 4 to midnight. After every shift, I had about a 20-minute walk down a dark mountain road through the woods to reach my bus stop. Also, there were no streetlights. There's dark, and then there's in the woods in the shadow of a mountain dark. After a week or so, I started getting stalked by a pack of coyotes. One coyote isn't terribly impressive, like an ugly medium-sized dog. 2 coyotes aren't super intimidating either, but 3 or more is a different story. Once it's a proper pack, they get bold. The first couple of nights, it was just 1 or 2. I could see their eye shine about 40 or 50 yards in the woods. They'd check me out and then run off. After a week, 2 more. More started showing up. 4 or 5 at a time, but once I counted 8. The thing is, once there were 3 or more, they didn't run off. They'd follow me from the tree line every once in a while, crossing the street in front or behind me. They also stopped keeping their distance. They'd come as close as 20 feet or less. Seeing 8 pairs of glowing eyes is creepy, but the noises they make, holy So yeah, I carried bear mace at the ready during my walk to the bus stop for the whole season. Not a night guard, but I was a janitor for a little bit a while ago in a building that was only accessible by a key fob. You'd need one to get into the front door, and you'd have to use it again to enter the offices. The shift was from 4 p.m. to midnight, and if I finished early, I got to leave while still being paid until midnight. Each night, I'd hang out with my coworkers in the office until 5 p.m. Then we'd all head out to our buildings. I'd empty all the trash bins first, vacuum and mop where needed, take care of any scheduled cleanings like steam cleaning the curtains, and I'd hit the bathrooms last since everyone would normally be out of the office by that time. Most nights I was finished between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. There was a night when I was finishing up, and all I had to do was clean the bathrooms. I did the women's room without any issues, and then I headed into the men's room. When I went in, the lights turned on because of that sensor, and there was some man I had never seen before just standing in the middle of the bathroom. I have no idea who he was or how long he was in there, but he had to have stood still long enough for the lights to go off and then remain motionless so they wouldn't turn back on. When I saw him, I just turned around and left for the night. I worked at an airport, and while I was not a guard, I was the only one working the graveyard shift at my job. One night I was sitting at the front desk playing a game on my phone, and the sliding doors to the lobby opened. I looked up, didn't see anyone, thought it was weird, and went back to my phone. A few seconds later I heard a clacking noise on the tile floor in front of the desk. I very slowly stood up and then froze. 2 of the biggest Rottweilers I'd ever seen were standing in front of the desk staring at me. If they decided to attack me, there was no way I could fight both of them, and being alone until the next shift meant they would probably kill me. After what felt like an hour of watching them, their body language didn't seem aggressive, so I came around the desk and it turned out they were actually both super chill dogs named Sophie and Mac. They also knew how to sit, give their paw, and lie down on command. They belonged to a boat shop about a mile away, and it turns out airport security was very familiar with them, as they had a habit of escaping the boat shop and wandering the airport. They ended up hanging out with me for the rest of my shift until security picked them up and gave them a lift back home. I'm a night guard, but the story is from a colleague of mine. So my colleague was guarding this quite big complex in which the security system was not working. So they had 2 guards stationed at 2 different locations in this building. My colleague gets a call on the radio from the other night guard that he's hearing someone trying to break in. So my colleague rushes over there as fast as he can. Now this building was quite the maze and required a number of keys in order to get from where he was to where the other guard was. And he finds out that he's been given the wrong set of keys. So for him to get to where the break-in is happening, he now has to go around the outside of the building. This took some extra time, and when he arrived, he found the other guard knocked down in a pool of blood. He had tried to stop the 3 guys doing the break-in by himself and got rewarded with a hard pipe bash to his head. My colleague pressed his SRT, the panic alarm, and tried to tend to his friend's wound. It took about 5 minutes for the police and EMTs to get there, but he said it felt like it took hours, since he was pretty sure his colleague was going to die. He ended up in a coma for 5 days and also lost some of his eyesight in his left eye. But other than that, he recovered quite well. No one got caught, since the attackers just hit him blindsided and decided to get the hell out of there once they clocked him. My colleague still works as a night guard, but the other guy that got a pipe to his head had a few months to recover and now works as an EMT instead. Not a guard, but I was alone at my grandfather's home when he was in the ICU. As I fell asleep at 1 a.m., I heard the doorbell ring. I go out to open the door expecting my relatives, but there's no one there. Confused, I get back into bed and try falling asleep. It's 3 a.m. now, and I hear the doorbell ring frantically again. This time, long rings like someone held their finger on the doorbell. I'm scared this time. I jump out of the bed and look through the window to see if there's someone at the door. I don't see anyone. Scared as hell, I get back into bed, waiting for that ringing to stop. It stopped ringing after about 15 minutes. I was totally convinced that my grandfather had passed away and his soul was trying to get into his home. I fell asleep around 6 a.m. as the sun came up. The next day I told my experience to my dad. He checked the doorbell's exposed wire box and came out laughing. There was a gecko trapped in the wires. Whenever it brought the 2 wires together, the doorbell rang. Not a night guard, but when I worked at Sam's Club, I took a couple of night shifts to get my department ready for a big sale event. I would get there at about 2 a.m. and be done at 10 a.m. Our store is located on a hillside, kind of back toward the woods a little bit. To get in after hours, we had to go around to the back of the store and go through the receiving entrance. It was always dark and creepy, but I never felt scared or anything. Until my last night shift. I got the unsettling feeling of being watched, like hairs on the back of your neck standing up, heart beating out of your chest, unsettling. I booked it into the store and slammed the door shut behind me. One of the night crew asked what was wrong and I told him. He laughed and told me, "Welcome to the night shift." And about 10 minutes later, one of the night crew went out the same door for a cigarette and a bear climbed out of the dumpster beside the door. I used to work as a security officer. They give you the lamest assignments when you're first starting out, so for a while I was posted at a summer camp. This camp was set way back in the woods, so between that and the huge amount of food and garbage that the campers left scattered all over the place, we occasionally had problems with bears. Well, one night, I was doing my patrol around 2 a.m. or so, and I noticed one of the doors to the kitchen was open. This was one of those big industrial-sized kitchens. I figured somebody snuck in to get a snack or whatever, so I snuck over and got ready to surprise them. Figured I'd catch them in the act for a bit of fun. I rushed through the door quickly and turned my very, very bright flashlight on, but I didn't see a camper or a counselor. No, I saw a goddamn huge black bear trying to break into one of the coolers where they kept the fruit. This sumbitch was probably a good 400 to 500 pounds, and he did not appreciate my interrupting his snack time. I immediately lowered my flashlight and slowly backed away to try to give him space, but he started to follow me out the door. I had gotten probably 50 feet away from the kitchen when he came out of the door, but instead of running away, he just turned and sort of eyed me up. I was trying to keep backing away slowly when he began displaying signs of aggression, swaying his head and snorting and laying back his ears and such. I took an aggressive posture, made myself as big as I could, and started yelling and clapping and stomping at him. Usually at this point they'll just run off. They typically only act aggressively if they're scared, and they normally back away if you confront them. Not this dude. He bluff charged at me and continued to act aggressively, so I shined my flashlight directly at his face and tried to make as much noise as I could. Finally he retreated a bit, but then he turned back around and kept watching from a distance. No matter what I tried, I couldn't get him to flee the area. I was afraid some kid might come out of their bunk and end up getting mauled or something. So eventually I had to put out essentially an emergency call. The camp director and the rest of the staff were woken up, and they came down in their jeeps. Believe it or not, even driving toward this goddamn bear in a jeep without super bright banjo lights and the horn blaring didn't really faze him. He would waddle a few yards and then turn back to watch us again. We ultimately had to call the game warden and keep all the kids and counselors inside their bunks until the warden could come and trap the bear to move him to a different area. I encountered a lot of black bears in my time there, and many more around my house where I live, and I've never seen one act like that. Usually the old adage that they're more afraid of you than you are of them is true, so they'll run off pretty easily. Not so with that bear. Worked third shift at a long-term care place for retired nuns and priests in Ohio. I can tell you some stories about how the clergy act when they start to slip at old age, but overall it was a good job with good people in it. Nice place, 5 to 6 rooms in each section with a large common room in the middle. Would only have a desk light on in between rounds, and I would often spend my nights reading. One night after my second set of rounds, I look up to see one of the sisters who rarely ever got out of bed, let alone ever spoke. She had severe dementia, standing in her nightgown directly in front of her door, pointing out the window in the common room I was in, and she starts screaming, "Omega! Omega!" 24 at the time, and I straight up almost shit my pants. There really is no way to describe the sound of it, but it was some serious next level Silent Hill, hair on your neck and arms standing never sleep again stuff. One of the nurses came over and helped her back to bed, and when she came back out, she must have seen my face. She politely told me Omega was her sister's name. It was a solid 2 hours later when I finally got calmed down enough to ask myself, who in the hell names their kid Omega? I enjoy these stories, and I wanted to ask you guys, so I used to commute into the city, New York City, and I'd take the Long Island Railroad. And as you get closer to the city in western Nassau County, almost the Queens border, there are a lot of dilapidated old factory buildings where I guess they used to sew stuff or textiles or whatever. I was always fascinated looking at them, the broken windows, these tiny little portals, and I always want to go in them, and I look at it and it gives me a sense of comfort. Anybody ever have that, or is that a medical thing, or it has some name? Anyway, I don't know. It's weird, I guess, but that's what's on my mind. Last overnight shift watch on a naval air station in a building that did advanced maintenance on planes but was not a hangar. Around 2 a.m. on my rounds, I hear people talking from the mech shop. No big deal, as sometimes those guys pull all-nighters or are asked to come in early. I go down there to shoot the ship because I'm bored, but all the lights are off and it's empty. Weird. I tell the senior watch on duty in the front of the building, and he says no one has signed in and it's just the two of us. About an hour later, I hear it again. And while walking around and I investigate, lights out, no one is there. It's getting weirder. The third time it happens, it's about 4 a.m., and the senior watch and I are sitting up front watching TV, and we both clearly hear tools being thrown around at the mech shop, changing on the floor, and hollow banging against an engine that was in there. He tells me to go see what's going on, and I tell him no fucking way. My discharge is in about a month, and he could go look himself. He shrugged it off and went back to watching TV. I checked in with the mech guys the next day, and they said their tools had not been moved, and no one had been in overnight. I'm the head custodian at a middle school. Generally, I work a 6 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. shift, but sometimes during the summer I'll work weird hours to get all the floor waxing in. As I'm the only full-time custodian, that generally means I completely alone at 2 or 3 a.m. I don't believe in ghosts or anything, so the only thing I have to fear is the random vagabond that may be around, and usually they just want to sleep under the breezeway, which is fine. We get a lot of rain, so I try to be understanding. Anyway, our intercom system has a glitch, which causes to periodically turn on by itself. I haven't heard anything creepy yet, but it's horrible to hear the intercom switch on with the white noise of whatever room it happens to activate. I'm always sort of expecting to hear voices or movement or something, but alas, the supernatural evades me, thankfully. Ever hear of the wave of cattle mutilations that happened back in the 70s? Many had logical explanations, natural predators, etc., but many are still unexplained. I had a job in high school cleaning a small meatpacking plant at night, a couple of miles outside the small town I lived in. This was spooky enough, being alone in the slaughterhouse at night, running the noisy pressure washer, etc. In the winter, it was dark when I got there, and it was always dark way before I left at 10 p.m. or so. One day the sheriff called me. A cow had been found mutilated in the field next to the slaughterhouse. To get to the field, you had to go through the driveway of the slaughterhouse. It had happened sometime the night before, perhaps while I was inside working. The S organs had been surgically removed from the cow, along with all the blood, presumably through 2 small puncture wounds in the cow's neck. The vet that performed the autopsy, necropsy, couldn't find enough blood to get a decent sample for testing, even after cutting into the heart. Yes, I continued to work there, but of course, was even more drastically creeped out than before. My dad was a janitor for years and told me a couple stories. One was when he worked as a middle school. He would go in early and clean, we're talking 5 a.m., and he'd be the only one in the whole building. Anyway, one time he goes to clean a counselor's office, which used to be a storage closet but was converted. But when he goes to unlock the door, he can't open it. The desk inside has been pushed up against the door as if someone was trying to prevent someone from coming in. This would be no biggie. Except the only way out of the office was through that very door, and there were no windows. He later heard from other staff that odd and creepy things like that would happen every so often at that school. When he used to work in an elementary school, he would stay even after the teachers would leave for the day. Often they would say or wave bye to him as they left their classrooms, and he continued cleaning into the night hours. He remembered this one teacher who was always nice to him, and she would say, "Bye, see you tomorrow," with a smile, and she would always wear high heels that would clack, clack, clack against the tile as she left. She died in a car accident not long after, and my dad says that every so often, when he would stay late and clean, he would hear clack, 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 echoing down the long, dark hallway. My dad is my hero. I'd have noped out on both occasions. Worked at a construction site, parked in my vehicle on a slight grade near the entrance facing uphill. Out of nowhere, a huge wall of wind slams into my car from behind, blowing a tunnel of dust around my vehicle. The sensation I felt from seeing the dust made me feel like I started rolling backwards downhill, and I panicked and slammed the brake in my not running parked brake vehicle. Then after that, all security lights around the site went off. I jump out of my vehicle and run to the center of the property. There are tarps and bags of material on site, and the wind was whipping all of them, making the sound of a stampede. Finally, in the middle of everything, 2 dust devils popped up and started swirling around each other. It was the most dramatic and disorienting experience I've had. It all happened within a minute. It was like I was living a boss intro cinematic. I have a few. One night I was working in Porter Ranch, California. It was an outside job. It was about 3 a.m. and I looked up to my left, and there was what I can only describe as a giant cigar-shaped black blimp in the sky. It was so huge, and it looked so close. My heart dropped, and I just stared in awe. I was convinced I just observed aliens. I would tell this story to my friends and family for years, and they would literally always laugh. Sometime later, I came across an article that showed something like what I saw, and apparently it was a military blimp, okay? It was much fatter in a sense to where I saw was elongated. At the same location another night, my routine patrols took me around the perimeter of the building, and in the back it would overlook a bridge, the freeway, with a huge valley underneath. Throughout the entire night, I heard weird chants from a group that sounded almost satanic from under the bridge. 12-hour night post. I was tired and had to go for a piss after doing nothing but look at a fence for hours and eat Pop-Tarts and down coffee like my life depended on it. Luckily, it was like 4 a.m. and foggy as hell, so I walked over to a tree a couple of feet behind our vehicle, still wearing my gear and taking my rifle with me, of course. I left the door on the Vic open, since the layers of fences and the machine gun on top of it kinda negated locking the damn thing anyway, and the AC was probably broken in the truck. Can't remember, but they usually were pieces of shit. So we usually just prop the doors open with our feet. Probably a bad move considering what our job was, but it was effing hot, wearing all that gear crammed in a shitty metal box for 12 hours, even at night. Anyways, I finish up, light a smoke, and go around with the thermals we had in the back of our truck for a bit because they were fun to use, and I was bored out of my mind. Thermals are cool AF, in case you were wondering. The other backseat guy hops out and messes around with the thermals as well, because he was also bored out of his mind. Still bored, but it was Pop-Tart time again. The brown sugar cinnamon ones are the best. I know, because I ate a lot of Pop-Tarts during my time there. I walk back to my seat, and as I go to put my rifle back in its little bracket thing, something moves directly in front of me, on my seat, maybe 8 inches away. There's a fat raccoon stealing my half-eaten Pop-Tart directly in front of my face. This guy managed to sneak in with the driver and a gunner a foot away, and all our defenses were useless against this cunning creature of the night. Instinctively, I jumped back as fast as I could, shouting expletives, of course, nearly eating shit on the wet grass. Little bastard sprints off with what remains of my Pop-Tart clutched in his 2 front people hands, running on his hind legs like a demon into the mist. Gone. After I made the discovery that there were night demons in our ranks, I was determined to find where they came from. They came down from the trees. I haven't even thought that they'd live in trees, but considering how good these people hands were, it made perfect sense. Of course, they could climb easily on trees. We debated hunting them while we couldn't shoot them. Discharging a weapon at a raccoon is a great way to pick yourself. We could have smacked them with the machine gun tripod or other heavy items. The issue with that is that we would have to dispose of them, and if we killed them all, we would return to our eternal fence watching and Pop-Tart devouring. I didn't even really like Pop-Tarts, but it was pretty much the only food you could get once dinner was over. Instead, we would befriend the creatures of the night. We made trails of Pop-Tarts leading back to us, and eventually lured them in to drink little cups of coffee creamer. It was adorable, and much less boring than watching fences. I was working the night shift on a university campus. It was my first time working the Christmas break. Generally, most students go home unless they have permission to stay. Usually foreign students, where it didn't make sense to travel home for 2 weeks. Anyways, I was performing lockup that night, and after I finished my buildings, mostly academic and administrative, they wanted to patrol the upper floors of the dorms to look for signs of water leaks in the hallways. Like I said, the dorms are supposed to be mostly empty, so I'm not expecting to see anyone. I get to the first dorm and ride the elevator to the top floor. The elevator opens into a common area. Little do I know on either side of the elevator are mirrors on the wall. I step off the elevator, either looking straight ahead or at my phone. I notice something moving out of the corner of my eye, so I turn my head to look. I yell out, "Jesus Christ!" It took me a second to register that it was me in the mirror. Once I calm myself, I start walking forward again, notice something moving on the other side, and turn to face it. Again, "Jesus Christ!" and chiding myself for being so jumpy. There was also the time I was checking the largest building on campus on my own for the first time. My trainer neglected to tell me that this particular part of the building has shutters that close in the event of a fire to prevent said fire from breaking the glass, I guess, and getting oxygen. While they aren't being used, they're obviously stored in a rolled up form at the top of the window with a little bit hanging loose. Well, I walk into this section of the building. As the exterior doors close behind me and pushes air into the building, the air goes up the windows and shakes the shutters. Well, in my mind, this is a science building, and I am new enough for my coworkers to still play pranks on me. Some experiments, I was thinking the xenomorph from Alien had gotten loose and was walking the second floor. I speedwalked through the rest of the building, and it took me about a month before I figured out what was going on. I'm night security in a December at a British Woodland. It's in South Yorkshire and called Howell Wood. They were doing work on the paths and walkways, and I was guarding the equipment. The worst I had seen was a deer or a fox. I had the responsibility of securing the site compound, inventorying the gear at the start of the shift, and checking out the car park. You got some folk wanting to get away from it all with a lady that were perhaps not married to, while being married to someone else, and I'd usually just leave them to it. They weren't going to cause me any problems. They were middle-aged men. I was 19, a mountain biker, and quite fit. One night I heard a blood-curdling scream. Imagine finding a woman alone and hitting her in the gut with an axe, or showing her a big hairy spider. It didn't echo, but sort of filtered across the trees. Then I heard it again. It was a woman screaming, but at the same time it maybe wasn't. Whatever it was, it pierced the silent darkness like so many well-aimed arrows. I had no lighting, only a flashlight. We didn't have 3,000 lumens or LEDs in our pockets in 1999. I had to find out what this was, and to me, the key was lighting up the forest. I got 15 5-watt halogen bulbs, designed a circuit to run them, and used 4 D-sized NIMH cells to power it. It'd last maybe 10 minutes, but enough to see what the hell was making that noise. I'd get maybe 1,000 lumens out of it. For comparison, the headlight of my current MTB is 3,000 lumens and uses 4 18,650 lithium-ion cells to last around 4 hours. Being in 1998, I didn't use the internet much, but I had it and used CB radio. I got talking to a friend who was a groundskeeper in a nearby stately home. I mentioned this god of all flashlights I was building and why. He laughed at me. Sounds like a vixen in heat. They sound like that. They're not dangerous. The girls will be even more skittish than usual when they're in heat. All you're going to do is terrify them, and you won't see them in the undergrowth anyway. I'm not a night guard, but last year when my friends and I were walking to our dorms after studying at Princeton's engineering library, that was around 11 p.m., and there were 8 people, our group and 3 random people walking on their own. We all experienced, well, for me, our scariest moments. So after walking for around 2 minutes from the library, there was a tree right beside the street, but not so high and not so big, no one could even hide behind it. But it was very lush. We couldn't barely see what was above it. Then all of a sudden, the bushes near the tree started moving like there was a raccoon for quite a long time. And we were just standing there looking for the moving object, all of us. Not too long after that, the tree was moving rapidly. And again, we were just standing there figuring out what's going on. And right after that, 3 of us, one random guy, my friend and I, clearly saw a bald man with almost full, pale, and very dry skin crawling in a weird way. Both hands move forward first, then both legs follow. So fast. And we clearly heard the sound of a sniff, but so rapid that creepy thing disappeared behind a bush. And if I recall correctly, the 3 of us were just standing there freezing. I couldn't even feel my breath till some people, who couldn't see it, freaked out at the sound and suddenly shocked me, and I was no longer staring at the bush. We then ran to the nearest crowd and talked about it, knowing that only 3 of us could see it, and that 2 neither see nor hear. I swear to you, the bush was in our vision range. It was impossible for anyone to not watch such a big object moving. It was literally beside the street we walk on. 3 days after that, when I came back to the library, not at night of course, one of the librarians that is very close to me said that yesterday, which means 2 days after the incident, a bunch of female students freaked out, saying that they saw exactly what we saw, but headed toward the library. Then I told her that we saw exactly the same thing, but she said that I should keep it to myself and just forget it. What frightened me the most was how she, the librarian, described what the female students saw, precisely like what we saw. I used to work on a farm, and it was the base of a mountain. Lots of wildlife. We would do overnight field trips for kids and would have to walk them to their bunks at night. Once the kids were inside, we would walk back down. So we're walking back to the office in the darkness and hear extremely loud and unsettling screams accompanied by very loud stomping sounds. It's so loud and so dark, my coworker and I don't know what to do. We're shining the flashlights but can't see anything, but we know it's getting closer. It turns out it was just the neighbor's horses. We were so concerned with all the wildlife, we didn't stop to think it was horses out of their stable. One more story, and this was in the daytime. We had a day camp for kids, and we had about 30 kids in the building. The kids started screaming and running around. I looked outside, and they were a bear in broad daylight walking toward the building. All the windows and doors are open, and it walks inside. Some are trying to run away, some are crying, and some are trying to get close to the bear. I look at my coworkers, who are freaked out, and tell them to wrangle the kids and get them in a corner farthest away from the bear. The bear was slightly startled, so it went outside again, but was right next to the door. I had to walk over there and shut the door so it wouldn't come in. To close the door, I had to be about a foot away from it. Scariest experience of my life. I've worked overnights as security in all sorts of places. A halfway house and microbiology lab that works with Ebola, a lab that did testing for all sorts of stuff, STDs, parasites, and newborn blood tests. The strangest night, however, was my last night, which was at a condo apartment building. I had my first tonic-clonic seizure that night at work. Before I left for work, I had what I know now was a simple partial seizure. There was a room on the main floor that was used for parties. This was a condo apartment where you could rent the party room, but doubled as a break room and place to get changed for security. When I got in and went to get changed, I found a huge pool of blood, easily larger than 6 by 6 feet, in the party room. I was really confused because of the seizure more than anything, so I went and lay down on the couch in the room, and my recollection of things broke down. I had the tonic-clonic seizure I mentioned at some point. The police and ambulance were called. I had hit my head and opened a good cut on it. The strange part is the police didn't think I had bled the blood and described it as a murder amount of blood. They questioned me like I had murdered someone. I had literally no clue what was going on and said they should ask the person who was in before, because as far as I could remember, it was there when I arrived. As far as I know, there's been no explanation as to the source of the blood.